because this is almost 2 months, 20 hours, yeah, 20 hours to actually teach in a semester for us. For you guys, 20 hours is almost like, I don't know, here how many hours in a semester? For 40 hours. 40 hours. So what you teach? It's 4 months, right? Semester. Okay. Yeah, for us it's 12 weeks. There's reading weeks, week in between, and there is a break in between. So ultimately boils down to 10 weeks. And you have 2 hours, 10 weeks, 2 hours, so 20 hours. It's almost a semester. But in India, sometimes they teach, sometimes they don't teach. And that's why no, that doesn't happen. Teach means you have to, like, it's all pre-planned, pre-programmed. Teaching is, yeah. Anyway, so this is the last bit when we will talk about a bit of, we start with gender aspect of it. So we'll do 2 things. First, we'll see what is the gender aspect, why gender diversity is very important in firm performance, why gender, there is a standard gender wage gap, what are the reasons behind it, what is the reason behind gender wage gap, what is the wage difference, why the wage differential, are there theoretical reasons behind wage differential, or it's more or less empirical attributes that we find in terms of gender differentials. And then we'll have a small session on trade and gender. There are many aspects of gender people look at because we did trade. We look at more or less newly evolving, you can say, because gender has been tackled for a long time, in a sense, why there is a gender differential in wage. If you know about the literature, Golden got the Nobel Prize a couple of years back because of her work on gender. Why there's a systematic difference. If you look, I'm sure you have looked up her work, Claudia Golden in Harvard. She had made like enormous contribution to understand why there's a systematic differences in gender across generations. And there are many aspects people try to explain why gender wage gap persists, or what are the observed differences, unobserved differences in terms of the gender gap. But very recently, last 20 years about, there is a literature that has come out on trade and gender, like why, because as we are discussing, if you remember, because from the 1990s onwards, the developing countries have started liberalization, more or less. Of course, if you see Latin America, if you see Asia, it's pretty much the same pattern across the 90s. They started opening up. Developed countries already open up, so you cannot really utilize those shocks, especially in academia, to understand when a quasi-natural shocks come in or when an external shock comes in. When foreign competition comes in, what happens? It's mainly developing countries where the gender persistent gap is very high. So we'll do a bit on gender diversity in general, on aspects of different kinds of gender and a bit of trade and gender. Okay. And then we have a tutorial as well. We have some data and we'll try and work out what happens in the Indian case, like what are the gender ratios, what stuff across industries, across firms and stuff. Okay. So one of the key aspects of the labor market outcomes is gender discrimination. One, so if I'm sure you know of the Sustainable Development Goals that UN kind of laid out that we have to achieve by 2030. Most of them kind of decided that we are way behind this. It's impossible to achieve Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. So they have kind of pushed back things way long. But in terms of gender, they're still trying, the focus is very high on gender, kind of to put together as fast as possible in terms of getting as minimal as gender gap in the labor markets, gender wage gap, and all sorts of gender gap there. There is a quote by chief economist of the current chief economist of the World Bank, Inga Hill. He says last year, about 1.5 years ago now, that closing the gender gap in employment would raise the long-term domestic product per capita by nearly 20% on average across countries. This is huge. 20% increase in GDP across the average across countries. If you close the gender gap, like they run a macro model and see, they run simulations and see to arrive in this number. And this is, you can see, this is pretty important. And World Bank also has now a lot of focus on creating jobs for women. And this labor force participation gaps, ILO has been talking about it for long now. It's not right now. I'm kind of trying to get to the recent reports. This is kind of there are reports after this, but this is the one I got through. And they show that labor force participation gaps are huge in the context of emerging economies, but not very starkly different in developed economies. If we come to Europe and the US is worse than Europe. It's pretty much, there are gaps as well. This is not a rosy picture if you come to developed economies, except for Scandinavia. In Europe, the only one country, only set of countries which has a close where you can think of are the Scandinavian countries. They are pretty much equal in every possible sense, not only the gender gap, in other social indicators. If you go to Scandinavia, they operate in a different developmental model. It's very difficult to adopt that developmental model. So we keep on saying, and for Norway, jokingly, Norway's population is about now 50, 60 lakhs, and Delhi's vehicle population is 1 crore. So Delhi has more cars than the entire population of Norway put together. So things are so that you can run the developmental model in a different way than other countries. So this is more or less the big picture about, and if you look at the global level, there is 75% of the men participate in the labor market compared to 48.5% of women. This is pretty high. And even for OECD countries, which is, let's say, indicator for developed countries, that employment gap varies to 15 to 25%, with the wage gap about 4 to 40%. The four around is the Scandinavian countries. But I'll also give an example for a paper on Scandinavian country where actually, due to trade, gender gap started increasing. Which is interesting. So according to the Global Gender Report published by the World Economic Forum, there has been an increase on the gender gap between men and women in terms of economic participation and has been widened. In fact, if you go at the current rate, what they highlight is it will take 70 more years. I don't know why I've written 7 years. Maybe 70 was there and then 170 was there and then forward to this. 170 more years for women to achieve the economic parity. So this is 170 years means we talk about 30 years about a generation. On average, a generation comes in after 30 years. That's the average age when a child is born of a man or a woman. So it's about 6 generations to for an economic parity to men. And this is widely unequal. And this would be different for different countries. This is an average across global level, but this would be different. And so, despite this economic growth, declining fertility rates, and rising levels of education, India's female labor force participation we look at is actually fell sharply from over 37% in 2005 to 27% in 2016, and it has actually dropped after COVID to 23.5% or something like this. It's really a concern that the more we are growing and the female force participation rate is going down more in the urban areas rather than the rural areas. And so there's an interesting, and there are many reasons behind this. So I have a friend or a colleague from Bangalore, Srinivasan Murali. Srini has a paper, and he shows that one reason to explain this fall is the significant rise in the incomes for the males in India. So in urban areas, we are not talking about the rural areas. In the urban areas, the rise of the male income went so much as a couple, they built a model around this. As a couple, they thought about maximizing the household utility. So since the income went up so much, I will take care of the house, you take care. So these are educated couples I'm talking about, not, and they were urban educated couples. So that's how they build a model around, because there is no other way to explain this. Both are educated, both are working, and male income goes up, it doesn't matter. If two both are earning, let's say 10 rupees each, one income goes up to 50. Now you have 25. So why do you, if you leave 10 plus 10, and then you have 25 plus, let's say 10, 35, then otherwise you have only 25 if you drop 10, for example. But since it has increased from before, they kind of left the job. That's one explanation. I don't know how much this could be true, but there are reports that women have left the job because men, there are anecdotal evidences that men income has gone up significantly. In the urban areas. Again, this is our purely urban educated couple phenomenon. So this is a really concern. And if you see, this is from the US. We're talking about developed countries. So you can see the hourly wage. Hourly wage for a white male was about $19. For a white male is about $12. So 50% less, almost. Yeah. You can see there are significant differences in black males. The black male and a white female almost get similar wage. Even if you look at the females' wage rate, the females' wage rate are not pretty much different. But there is significant. Now, if you take out the white male completely, the wage rate is not that different across black males, Hispanic means Mexican or Latin American males versus any kind of female population. The white males get a disproportionately higher proportion of the income or the wage. This is the US data set. So this is vastly not only across the females male wage gap, but even for other males from other ethnicity. Let me just theorize a bit why there's a wage differential. Very simple model. There is what the labor economists try to do is they try to explain this differential between an explained part and unexplained components. So if you assume that wages for individual I in group 1 can be written as something like this. This is the wage, this is the observed characteristics. That's why you get wage, and there is an error term that you don't observe. Similarly, for individual J in group 2 is like this characteristics, there is another error term. And we assume for the moment, for simplicity, that there is no correlation between your observed and unobserved characteristics. Otherwise, things get messier. Just to have a very simple model. And if we just do a difference in mean wages for year T, this can be written as some equal for the sum. Okay, there is mean wages. Now, what is the point B? What is this part and what is this? So this part, all you can understand is this is the observed differences between wages. This can be explained because these are the characteristics of the two groups. Let's say this is male and this is female. You can observe characteristics. Let's say one is highly educated, one is not. One has maybe more, if they're working in production workers, maybe more physical brawn, less physical brawn, something like this. That you can observe. What is that? What is this beta 1t minus beta 2t, which is a component of the wage differential? This is, as I said, the explained component. The second term is the unexplained component that you cannot observe. It represents the differences in the estimated coefficients, but this is the difference in returns to similar characteristics between groups and 1 and 2, which we don't observe. So this is what the discrimination is. This is from where discrimination rises. Because this could be taste-based discrimination. This could be, I don't know, this could be based on certain set of people I like. This could be based on certain education I would prefer, that I want to have degrees from that. Even if you're same skill, I want to have a degree from that kind of institution. Could be. There could be anything. This discrimination. So that's the unexplained part for a labor economist. And the second component, they are to capture both the effects of discrimination and unobserved differences in productivity and test. Because there are differences in productivity across both group, and there is test as well. So all this unobserved is explained by this, and people have tried to see how we can actually close this gap between beta 1 and beta 2 in terms of the unexpected part. Clear, more or less, this is the second component. Therefore, sorry, also misleading to label because the second component as a result of discrimination, since discriminative barriers in the labor market can elsewhere also in the economic and affect excess. So for the moment, we assume this is relaxation of that function. If you go, if I go back, what we assume is this is this term and this term is not affecting each other because we assume this. In real world, you cannot assume this actually, because this x's are very much dependent on the terms that you don't observe. Your observed characteristics is driven, let's say, how motivated you are or how good education you have, which is an observed characteristics. It could be driven by your parents' motivation, for example, or your peers' motivation that we don't observe. No one can observe that. So just for the sake of a simple model, we assume this, but in real world, it's not actually. So it's very much driven. The excels are very much driven by the error term or the PY puts, which is in the unexplained part. And so two main factors were discussed in gender gap in earnings, human capital accumulation. Standard general, if you go to any developing country, used to the men had more human capital because men used to go out of home. They had more human capital accumulation. They studied more. So that's one thing. And there is, which is taste-based or statistical discrimination. Statistical discrimination means let's say there are statistics where people went through to see men, let's say females, cannot do overtime. There are statistics. And that's why I am discriminating of taking women for the night shift jobs. Because I have read statistics where, or there are statistical evidences where it says women can't do night jobs, night shift jobs. So that's statistical based discrimination. But there are statistics there, and that also related to taste as well, because it's my taste as well, but it's a statistical based discrimination. So there is, I guess, a paper in for India on trade and gender by Ashmita Gupta. So she shows that women gender gap, wage gap actually increases and is because the factories where you have night shifts more or more man days, something like this. I don't remember exactly what she shows. She used the ASI data and shows that in those factories and the gender wage gap actually increases, or gender gap in employment. Sorry, we don't have data on wages by gender, it's employment data. So she shows that it's mostly the factories which have runs across the 24 hours. In those factories, in those industries, there are evidences of increase in gender gap in employment. This is pretty much statistical discrimination that I only be employing women for night shift jobs. There are many reasons, and those are the reasons I'll come next. Why they wouldn't do it. Let me. So there are many others. There are risk attitudes. There are different ranges. There's attitude towards competition. There are many papers on this that say, especially attitude towards competition. There is a statistical thing about that men like competition more than women. And there are papers a lot that try to run experiments where they try to normalize this competition by, I guess, Oriana Bandera and Imran Rasool. And they try to run experiments to see is actually true or not. that men prefer more competition than women. Or these are statistical discrimination. There are social preferences. This comes peak social preferences. Then this attitude towards negotiation, in terms of wage negotiation. Men said to be more better negotiator than women on average. I don't know whether it's always true or not. Other traits, there are productive traits like cognitive skills, there's extroversion, there's men are more extrovert than women. These are all linked to also social condition as well. Agreeableness, some would say men agree to things more adjustable than women. There are many, many other reasons. This is not exhaustive about why there are gender differences. But where do these preferences and personality trait comes from? If you combine all this, one is nature, which is the social norms as well, or how, sorry, one is nature, is how there's that significant differences between two gender. This is given. You can't do anything. There are differences across gender, and there is nurture. How are being brought up? Which is the environment you are being brought up? Which is the environment you are being conditioned? In a sense, you are being conditioned to understand these are the jobs for women, these are the jobs for men. This is called nurture. You are being groomed to think that way. If you're not being groomed to think that way, things would have been, because it automatically would come to you that I can't do this job, I can't do this, I can't do that. I shouldn't be going so much for, let's say you have been conditioned, right? We all know this growing up. This is not actually untrue, right? Women have been taught to think more about families. It's not, I'm talking about India. This is pretty much standard across all nations. And men have been going out to do the jobs. This is pretty much standard, more or less. Very few places, very few things are different, but pretty much standard that works that way. So this is nurture. If you are being groomed that way, then you will socially conditioned to think that way. That if something comes out, something happens, I am the first one to leave the job and do something. That's how we've been got, more or less, everywhere. So that's nurturing. And that plays a big role when you think about outcomes of the job market. That plays a big role in a sense that women would, because they are conditioned that way, they would not go for the most high competitive jobs because that takes a lot of the time, a lot of their time out from the family, because they have been conditioned to think their time is best. So this is called nurturing. And nurturing plays, we think about it, but when it shows up in the gender gap in the labor market, in terms of wages, in terms of gender force participation, all this shows up in the labor market, and that has a big implications for our macro. And imagine again, we are talking about farms before that farm, when we look at farms, because the micro level matters at the macro level. All this can add up. Exactly the same. All these social prevailing social norms or small things are being brought up, kind of start accumulating when you are participating in the labor market, shows up in your macro scenario when you are presenting the macro outcomes. So all this add up at the macro level. So gender identity, the big explanation of the labor market outcomes, so it's all defining, was the prevailing, I guess I will show you this. Yes, prevailing social norms. What is appropriate for men? What is appropriate for women? And this is a mind-blowing paper, and you should, if you have not read George Applelove's and Rachel Cranton's paper, you should read this. They have modeled this. Theoretically, they have modeled how prevailing social norms can explain job market outcomes and labor market outcomes. And this is absolutely true. They are cross. This is nothing specific to. They have a theoretical model. This is nothing specific to any set of countries. This is specific worldwide. What they do is they model identity as one sense of self, or one sense of belonging to one or multiple social categories. One's identity encompasses a clear view about people belonging to that category should be this. So I grew up, let's say, in a matriarchal society. For example, there are evidences, if I, as a boy who grew up in a household which saw their mothers to have a more matriarchal role, they would prefer their wives to have out jobs. There are empirical evidences on this. So if you grew up seeing, so basically you're nurtured, your social values, the peers, how it prevails around you, that kind of drives you, because that kind of grooms me to think about that the women should do this, because you can think of this is a biased sample for sure, because I am, as a child, when I'm growing up, I am growing up seeing my mother's mother and her, let's say, 10 friends, 15 friends. This is again very small bias, but this driving me when I'm going out, this is driving me to correct some sort of gender gap somewhere. If this is kind of thinking about at the micro level, people, the boys are going up. At the macro level, there is some sort of gender gap correction occurs, because if they prefer that way. Now you think of the opposite. If you're growing up in a patriarchal society, which a lot of evidences across many countries, many societies, then they groom to think that the men should behave that way, that the men should be going out of the house to have the jobs, and women should be like sometime not, sometime yes. If they can, they yes. If they can't, that's absolutely fine, because men is taking care of the money. There's other part of it. When you're being brought up in a household where you have always seen to maximize the household income. Like if the men earns a little bit less, women earns a little bit more, doesn't matter, because you're maximizing the household income. Then also things might get corrections. But most of us, these social norms induce differential sorting of men and women across populations, because we are being groomed to see that the women can do this sort of jobs, men have doing this sort of jobs. Because you have seen in your peers, in your social norms, that women, for example, teach more in the school because that has small hours, they can come back quickly, they can take care of the family, man can go for longer hours, for example, right? So this sorting happens because of the social norms. We don't think of this like an economist. When we see this sorting automatically takes place. And there is a big economic intuition behind this. Because social norms drive this. And they've supposed, what they do is, they propose a model where one's identity enters the utility function. And under this model, and one's identity can influence economic outcomes, because deviating from this behavior that is expected from you for one social category is assumed to decrease utility. This is a very important step. What then? So your identity, when you how you derive utility, your identity is a part of your derivation of the utility that you derive. Utility is not only a function of the income that you are. Your utility is also because of the social person. Everyone is a social animal, right? Utility not only derives from your income, utility is derived from your friends, your greater social circle, that what that my neighborhood people would say. You derive utility from this. You get affected from what people would say. This is how we derive our total utility. It's not total utility, it's just not eating good stuff and earning good income. Doesn't happen that way. In most of the cases. In very few of the cases, yes. We are not talking about top 1% of the people or top 5% of the people. That doesn't drive the social norms. Right? Where you are now, if you are deviating from what you are expected to do, then you have a decrease in utility, because people in your social circle started saying, no, this you are not doing good, you are not doing what you are expected to do. If you have been constantly bickering someone around you about it, your utility should go down, because you are deviating from the mean. There is a social mean of someone who is expected to do what? He is expected to do what? This this is expected to, she is expected to do this. And if you're deviating too much from there, then there is a negative utility, right? Because utility function is depending on your identity based on what you're expected to do. Your identity is expected to do something. This is what they say. In people's actions, economic actions can be a part, can in part be explained by a desire to conform with one's sense of self. If you be one sense of self, then your economic actions, in a sense, you're going out to do jobs or going out in the market, would be depend on how you want to identify yourself. If you want to identify yourself as a part of the society that you belong to, that gives you the sorting of how do you do in terms of economic actions. Your economic actions based on your derivation of the utility from your social surrounding. And this is pretty much true actually. Across every society, this is very, very true. That we believe in certain things and certain things should go that way. And an average individual would think, and then if there is deviation from there, we tend to think negatively about that person. And since if that person cares about others' opinions, which a huge set of people do, then it becomes a negative effect on their utility function. So there are two relevant social categories. That's what we're saying, man and women. These two categories are associated with the specific behavioral prescriptions, which in Violet, that's so. One obvious application is obviously labor force participation, right? Economic outcomes application is labor force participation. So as long there is a strong behavioral prescription indicating that men work in the labor market force, labor force, and women work in the home, norms regarding gender would explain why women have been slow at increasing their labor force participation. If you yes. Like that it is not always good for the economy that the government should participate. Support in military, there is a clear advantage for the men. Yes, but if you have a missile system completely where you just put a button and the missiles should go, then you don't need men. If you are completely automated military system, why do you need men? This is for some aspect of the yes, absolutely. So we will see primarily military is the man-dominated thing. That we have been conditioned to think that because what military was used to be for is to foot soldiers, is to go out to do the war. Now, a lot of war doesn't happen on these soldiers coming and fighting hand-to-hand combat, right? It doesn't happen war that way. You can see right now there are few geopolitical tensions going on where there is not more hand-to-hand combat happening. There's more pushing the buttons here and there is happening. And then anyone can push the button, right? So but we'll see evidences in the global case study, which I have a paper that changes or automation can drive stuff differently for women, which is in which oh my god, postpone. Good. So this is there is another. This is the other one is Golding's theory. I just want to highlight this. Given this one, Rachel Ackerloff and Crampton's paper, that Golden has a theory called pollution theory of discrimination. She also assumes that men derive utility from their work not just due to the wage they earn, but also how their image is affected from where they work. So, as a man, also want to drive women from certain jobs because broad female participation in those jobs can reduce the prestige that men draw from those jobs. So men, by default, would try to keep the woman away from these jobs. That also leads to discrimination in those jobs. That also leads to greater labor market outcomes. This one they have. The other one, there are gender identity. So 14 uses data from this World Value Survey to assess how women's sense of self relate to their labor market participation in a sample of 25 OECD countries. over 10-year period shows that social representation of women as homemakers and men as breadwinners appears quite stable across cohorts. And this is developed countries. For our time, and it's very predictive of women's labor force participation. So this is also very much. They also find some evidences in this. It's called mother's guilt. We all know about this. This is very much prevalent. They find in the data that there's a mother's guilt, that when they participate in the job market, that I'm away from the home, I'm away from the child, child is out with me, it's in the crash or whatever. That's the mother's guilt that works. That's by gender. There are observable differences between men and women. This is the mother guilt that works to kind of force them not to participate much in the labor market. So these are all the reasons as well. There is, yes. So I'm pretty much sure you have gone through this paper. So Goldin has a path-breaking paper about the concept of contraceptive pills. You have read this paper or have seen this paper? You should read it. So Claudia Goldin showed that, and her husband, I think Lawrence Katz is her husband as well, Golden and Katz showed that the introduction of the pill led to contraceptive pill led to an increase in women's investment in schooling and an increase at the first age of marriage. And this contraceptive pills led to significant labor force participation, and even investment in the school, women's investment in the schooling went down significantly. So what Goldin argues that women's adult identities were less influenced by traditional gender roles because now they have a way to postpone their role as a mother. So that's how this introduction of this pill kind of led women to be more free, to be more independent, to be more confident going out in the labor market, and that kind of corrects a part of their gender labor market outcomes. So you can see medical innovations also can correct gender market outcomes. What I wanted to show you more was why gender diversity, why we need gender diversity. We know there are the reasons of this participation, different reasons for women not participating in the labor market. And why do we need for this? Why gender diversity can make farms more productive? Why we're thinking that why they'll say that GDP would increase 20%. What that does mean? It means that the farms are going to produce more output. GDP increase simply means your output is going to produce, you are going to produce output. How do you produce more output? There are three reasons that have been identified. So a diverse workforce signals an attractive work environment for talent. So research has shown that employees in pro-diversity regions like the US and the Western Europe, especially the Western, prefer diverse work environments. And there's a survey of 1,000 respondents by this job site called Glassdoor, and they find that 67% of the job seekers overall look workforce diversity when evaluating an offer. Especially top female candidates, and in particular, care about gender diverse work environments. Yeah, a female would not like to go in a top which is male dominated, and they would like more diverse environment. And so the takeaway is the most talented individuals go to places that do better work with diversity because we learn from each other. There are different ways of thinking about, let's say, if you're introducing a product in a farm, we are introducing a product to market. For example, women have in general, women have certain ways of thinking how to, let's say, market that product, and men have certain ways of thinking how to market a product. And they could learn from each other to have a much better informed solution. So diverse work environment and gives you better talent to come to that farm, and that helps you the farms be more productive. When you value diversity, you encourage diverse idea exchange. That's what we're talking about. That significant research has shown that diverse teams can develop more innovative ideas. You have more because your experiences in life, your understanding, your perceptions of life are very, very different. When it comes together, then you have a better idea, informed better idea to understand how things happen. significant research showed that leaders with diverse backgrounds and experience help companies to innovate more. Diverse leaders are more likely to create an environment where new creative ideas are considered because you live in a diverse environment. In a sense, that's one good thing about academia. We find that we have different sets of colleagues, different from coming from different nationalities that helps us to run. So I met in a conference a French colleague in a southern city of France called Nice. I don't know if you've not heard of this, called Nice in the southern France. So he used to. So I was supposed to go somewhere, and he was taking me in his car, and he was used to work before in Sussex. He was in Sussex, which is in Brighton in England, and he shifted to France. And he's a French guy, and he was saying that Pavel, when I was being a French, when I was shifting to France, I really had shivers. I really was in that I didn't want to shift to my own country just because I'm not. I don't want to be with French. No, that's not absolutely not. It's just that in the academic environment of UK is so diverse that I'm celebrating at the moment. At a week back, I have a Diwali invitation, and the week after, I have a Thanksgiving invitation. So these in difference that a Diwali invitation in the first week of November, and 2 weeks after, I have a Thanksgiving invitation from my American colleague. That helps me to learn also the cultures. That helps me to enjoy an environment which is very diverse, and that helps us to learn. And being only in a French is I'm not celebrating this, but I would celebrate a more diverse environment because I was learning a lot more. I used to go out for cricket matches with my Indian colleagues. I used to go out for baseball with my American colleagues. So I would see both, and that's the learning experience we see. The more you get open up in terms of diverse environment, the learning process is just that high. As simple as that, because people have different environments. And this is also true for gender as well. Because they have different experiences, they are being grown up in a different way. A woman coming from a complete household which is dominated by women, for example, is very different, the way of thinking, than the way boys grew up. We have this in our household. I grew up in a boys, because we're two brothers, and the person I stayed with, she grew up in a completely girls and household. They don't have any boys in the houses. Father used to walk outside, say their sisters and mother. So her thinking and my thinking is so different when we see any attributes in terms of how a boy, for her, how a boy would behave, for me it comes very naturally. Yeah, this is going to happen. Because I've seen this, I've done this, I've seen with my brother, I've done this. For her, oh, this is very, very alarming. No, nothing would happen this way. When our daughter also behaves in certain way, and for her to understand when she does the feminine way, understand is much better because she has grown up seeing a sister. And for that also helps me to learn about this is the way I should expect. Because I was not, it's just social conditioning of me and the way I've been groomed up. So, in a sense, obviously, you are in a one household model here, but this diverse, if you take it to the macro level, if you take it outside of the home, the diverse environment creates an environment to learn more about exchange and innovative ideas, and that gives more in kinds of new ideas to happen. There is one more reason I have stopped the workforce type. Diverse workforce also signals competent management for the investors. If you see, there is so gender diversity and also signal investors that a firm is run well. There is a sociological research on market valuation suggests that investors value when firms use commonly accepted best practices, such as inclusion of diverse groups in hiring and penalize that break those norms. If an investor was in a context that accepted gender diversity, there is more likely that the diverse companies will be highly valued. And this is actually found. In fund performance, if you look up the literature, in fund performance, more or less it has been found that that when you have gender diversity, we do not find consistent evidences on per se labor value. versus sales of a farm. There is no theoretical, but there are more or less consistent evidences that when you have gender diverse cultures or gender diverse environment in a farm, the value of the stock, the returns from the stock goes up. This is pretty much consistent across Europe. This is pretty much, there is very little evidences on developing countries, but this has been more or less consistent that we find that the financial aspect of the farm, which because the female has a different financial understanding than the male. If you go back to behavioral finance theory, females are perceived to be as risk averse. Males are perceived to be as risk takers. So these combination of needs, averse and risk takers, if they come to the top management of a firm, kind of creates a situation. We try to have an average of these two that makes the financial performance of the firms better. This is pretty much consistent across. And the stock prices of those firms went up. People who invests in your firm tend to think that you have a better managed because you have a diverse work environment. The other aspects of the firm, there is not any consistent evidence that sales should increase, anything else should increase, doesn't happen. But there are not many theory, but in terms of the finance, because in behavioral finance, and this is true because males perceive things in a certain way and females perceive in a certain way, that creates a conducive environment to understand how finance works. Yes.
So, like in mentioned, I see also behavioral financial society about financial markets are sometimes inefficient.
Inefficient, yeah, but that's okay.
So, if you are like if you are not seeing the information, processing the information correctly, that because there are the facts, women are in management roles or CEO roles, then how do you, if you are not seeing that, then how do you rationalize that risk averse things that are there?
No, it's the theory that perceives women as risk takers. I guess risk averse and men as risk takers, because men used to go out more in the job market, men used to participate, men always took risky decisions. Women didn't take risky decisions. That's why being perceived that financially also women are less risk takers rather than men. So the combination of these two makes firms better financially. That's the point, that you are in a diverse environment. When a man, let's say, taking a risky decision, if you have to, for example, think about there are two board of directors, a man and a woman. And if your man is taking like a big risky decision, then there's another one who kind of allow not the man to take that much, but pulls back a bit. That makes the firm adjust their better in a better way in terms of financial performance. I'm not thinking about any other kind of performance, it's just the financial performance. Are you, for example, are you investing? What people have shown also that when they are men in the upper management, they diversify their volume. That I take 100 for rupees, I will diversify 100 rupees into, for example, 5 banks. I'll take 20 from each. So I'll take risk, I'll put my little bit of eggs in one basket. Men tend to not do that. I'll go to 2 banks and I'll get 50 rupees from each bank and go. And this is also, you'll see me personally, if you take this down but to a personal level in terms of shopping, it happens. So I can say for myself, I'll go to one store, I'll buy different stuff and come back, 6 stuff, one store done in 1 hour. When the other person would go, she would go to 2-3 different stores, buy the same amount of stuff, but go to 2-3. So this store is that good, that store is that good. So by default, this is by gender happens. That women tend to go choose different things rather than going to just one and taking everything out. Right? I tend to do that. I tend always to do that. I'll just go to one stuff and go everything done, and I have to go to the thing, right? It's very gender level attitude. Why should we go for love? I'm getting everything here, but no, there's the perceivedness of this is very different. You can see this, and this creates a conducive environment in this case. So, yes. Anything concern about? Then we are talking about empirical, then you have to solve empirical problems. We are not talking about empirical problems. So you can see this is where I would end up giving some more evidences. What's the time? Yes, giving a little bit of more evidences, and I finish in a minute or so. You can see even in the high level managers, this is US again, the top S&P 500 companies. Even in the top high level managers, men get $1,300,000 and women get 890. So there's a big difference even in the high level managers salary. There's a big difference. There's a big difference in the bonuses as well. Any other annual, anything you see, annual labor earnings is about not half, but 1/3 almost of the men. So even in the top S&P 500 companies, even in the top management, this kind of discrimination exists between the wage between men and women. So if you take this down, where you have purely highly educated men and women, if you take this down to the lower level, if you infer this to the lower level, this would be much, much higher in this case, right? So let's take a break, 5 minutes, and then come back to do a little bit more on gender and stuff.